All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I do hope everybody is well. Appreciate you all tuning in. We have a very special guest today, somebody who's been very influential on the political scene and also obviously the religious scene in the United Kingdom in regards to Speaker's Corner. So I would like to introduce Bob of Speaker's Corner.
Good
Bob,
evening,
how are you?
everybody. Well, thank you, Dave. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Right, sorry, Bob, are you there?
Yep, yeah, I'm here.
Yes, for people who are not aware of you, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, certainly. So, I go by the pseudonym Bob of Speaker's Corner. I'm an evangelist that works in London. I primarily seek to liberate Muslims from Islam. But in the midst of all of that, I evangelize other groups of people as well. And I do my work mainly at Speaker's Corner, but also through modern technology like Zoom, much further afield, working with churches and groups around the world. And I also work with churches and congregations and groups inside the UK, doing training sessions on apologetics and polemics, giving talks on various different topics. I established a group called the Order, which is a Christian group that teaches martial arts and chivalry. It's a chivalric society. I've established an app called the Christian Economy app, which does exactly what it says on the tin. It's about organizing a Christian economy. I've also released an apologetics app called Soko Armory that teaches apologetics via the app as well. I'm currently writing a book on apologetics, and I run a weekly Bible course that it meets on Zoom, in which I teach Christian discipleship, also apologetics and polemics, as well as meet with individuals to do one-on-one evangelism and run regular Zoom call meetings for free for anyone who wants to talk about anything on Thursdays, which you can book through my course. I write a blog where you can go and read things, and I run my own YouTube channel, which unsurprisingly is called Bob of Speaker's Corner. Lots of people think Soko Films is my channel. It isn't. I'm not supported through Soko Films, but my own channel, Bob of Speaker's Corner, is where you can find lots of my material, and I thoroughly encourage everybody to sign up. So I think that's as good an introduction as I can give, Dave.
Yeah, I think that hits everything. Would you so in regards to the topic that we're going to be discussing, Christian nationalism, I've had a few people when I put a post out with Christian nationalism, some people were skeptical of it, saying, "What is that? What does that even mean?"
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, if you're all right, I could do a small presentation on
Yeah,
Christian nationalism, somewhere between 20 to 30 minutes, and
okay.
then we could discuss it if you like.
Yeah, that's perfect. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So, shall I begin?
Yep.
So, I think the first thing to point out is that Christian nationalism is currently a definition, a term where the definition hasn't settled down. It's a bit of a contested and explosive term. And so the definition of the term is disputed and debated. But I'm going to give you the definition that I work to. I'm part of the Christian Nationalist Fellowship in the UK. And when we had our last meeting, everybody brought their own definition. And funnily enough, none of the definitions matched, but there were common themes that ran through all the definitions. And that would essentially be that Christianity and politics do go together, and we should organize our politics according to our Christianity. But the definition that I use is that the church is a people. So it's not an institution. I mean, it has institutions, but it's not an institution. The church is a people. And they're not a people that are bound together by a common blood or a common ethnicity or a common language or a common land. They are bound together by a common covenant, the new covenant. And it's that covenant that we share together that binds us together as a people and makes us into a people. So we're not a people by blood and soil or by civic nationalist institutionalism, but we're bound together by our common baptism, the common spirit, the common cross, the common Lord, the common God the Father, and the common church, the one church. And so this church is a body of people who have, therefore, as a body of people, social, political, cultural, and economic interests. And Christian nationalism says that they should pursue those interests without fear or interruption, and should pursue them whether they are in power or whether they are out of power in whichever state or kingdom or empire they happen to live in. Now, the point of Christian nationalism is to help Christians to identify what their concerns are as Christians. Now, some of these concerns are going to fall into a common category that we share with other people who aren't Christian. So things like the desire to have a country with clean rivers and a reduction in air pollution, or a safe environment to walk down the streets at night, or a productive and successful economy. These are Christian interests, but they're not unique to Christians. Everyone who lives in a given country is going to want those things. These are the common good. But then there are those things that are particular and peculiar to the church, to Christians. Things like the freedom to evangelize the gospel, solidarity with other persecuted Christians, non-state interference in church appointments. These are unique, non-interference in charitable organizations by the state. These things are unique concerns to Christians that Christians have because they are Christian. Now, central to Christian nationalism are two principal ideas: an emphasis on the idea of Christian identity and an emphasis on the idea of Christian solidarity. Christian identity is the fact that as Christians, we think of ourselves as Christians, we think of the world through a Christian prism, and we think of our place and our activity in the world from a Christian viewpoint. And Christian solidarity is the fact that Christians prioritize the unity, the brotherhood, and the life, the common life of the Christian community above others, and pursue those interests accordingly. And from these two ideas flow out the working out of this ideology and define its parameters and its limits and its concerns and its interests. Now, this is obviously distinct from other forms of nationalism, like ethno-nationalism and civic nationalism. And it shouldn't be confused, amalgamated, or synergized with these other forms of nationalism, because it is its own unique form of nationalism. Christian nationalism is as traditional and as conservative as the penetration of Christianity is to a particular civilization. But conversely, it is also as radical and as revolutionary as the non-penetration of Christianity into a civilization is. And so, depending on its context, Christian nationalism is going to take a very different tone to its environment. Christian nationalism seeks to build a new Christendom. It's looking to pursue the kingdom of God and to make that kingdom of God real in the real world, where the idea of Christendom acts both as vehicle of and expression of, or vehicle towards and expression of, the kingdom of God on earth. It rejects the Enlightenment belief that religion is a private matter that should be kept out of public affairs. And it rejects the Enlightenment belief that Christianity has no place in organizing the secular world and should be diverged and divested from the secular world. We actually think the secular world should be discipled under Christ's teachings in the same way that all areas of life should be. It rejects the idea that religion and politics should be divorced from one another, and instead says that the two are inextricably linked. Now, whilst the early church never had a term like Christian nationalism, it's clear to see from evidence that we can find in Scripture that the church did indeed pursue social, economic, political, and cultural concerns according to their Christian identity and according to Christian solidarity. So some examples. They recast sexual ethics and promoted monogamous marriage, which is a social concern. They created a welfare system, the first of its kind in the Roman world, and even created an office to administrate that system known as the deacons. And that's an economic interest. Politically, the early church refused to give the salts of incense, the salts of worship to the Kaiser. And they disobeyed the Sanhedrin when the Sanhedrin told them not to preach the gospel. And thus they pursued political concerns. And culturally, they kept things like the sacraments, the sacrament of baptism, the sacrament of the Eucharist, and this and the understanding of what these things signified. And so they cultivated, that's where we get the word culture from, cultural interests. So the early church, even though they never would have used a word like Christian nationalism, and they never would have described themselves as Christian nationalists, were doing what Christian nationalists consciously want to do. Christian nationalism is an organizing principle for Christians to organize their activities in the project of building a civilization. And it can be adapted by any particular denomination, but in itself, it's an ecumenical narrative because it prizes common Christian interests over denominational divisions. And with that very brief introduction, I'm happy to take questions or comments.
So Bob, what would you say in regards to people who are concerned or worried about demographic replacement? How does what you're proposing protect us from that, or do you believe that's not something we should concern ourselves with?
Well, the first thing, when we say us, I would have to stress that the us for a Christian nationalist is the church, right?
Yeah.
Now, but demographic replacement is a self-inflicted wound. It's something we've done to ourselves. It's connected to contraception, abortion, and divorce, and a hedonistic culture that prizes sexual experience and experiences over family values and the idea of building a family and getting married. And so because Christian nationalism prizes the family as a core Christian value, a Christian nationalism would seek to strengthen the family within society and see the family as the building block of our society, which means that we would seek through one means and another to restrict and eventually abolish abortion, restrict and eventually abolish contraception, and to make it much more difficult to get divorces. And so, along with other things that are more positive to support the family, like tax breaks and encouraging large families. But this is a long-term solution. I think that the patriotic community needs to accept something, that immigration is connected to decades upon decades of killing our own children in this
Yeah.
country. And until we become a pro-life community, the solution is not going to avail itself, you know.
So
And
you believe that they're bringing people here because of the decline in our birth rates are what they are, right? So that's something like we're not having children at replacement rate. So you believe that that is the cause for them bringing as many people here as they are. Because
yeah, if you
people have different theories, right? There are people who, and I don't subscribe to this theory, by the way, but they believe it's some kind of Jewish conspiracy. They're flooding in as many people as they can because they want to. So there's lots of different theories why they're bringing so many people. There's some people that are saying it to drive down wages, is greed. But I do subscribe to your theory. I do believe because we're not having children at replacement rate, that's why they're bringing people in at the rate that they are. And
yeah,
you can't have the immigration conversation without having the abortion conversation, because I believe they are connected.
yeah, I would definitely land well on that last point. There's no point talking about immigration if you're not willing to talk about abortion and
Yeah.
contraception. But let's be clear, like this idea that this is a Jewish conspiracy, it's utter rubbish. It's utter nonsense. And voices that keep talking like that are voices that will inevitably they shouldn't be anywhere near power, and they certainly shouldn't be influencing the patriotic movement. They're guaranteed to crash the patriotic movement and momentum off the road over a cliff. If their level of intellect is such that they believe in these kind of silly conspiracy theories, they are not voices that we need to heed. But I think it's more complicated than just saying it's because we're having abortions. I mean, if you look at the Windrush generation, that was brought in on the back of World War II because so many soldiers had paid with their lives, and so many other soldiers had been wounded. And so it was to fill a gap in the economy. And for generations, the organizing principle behind immigration has always been economic. But something along the way, and I'll be honest, I don't know when, but something along the way changed in the international framework that has meant that the ball has gotten away from government, and the government is no longer in control of immigration. It's almost like structures have been set up now where, and both illegal and illegal, where immigration is being dictated to the state rather than being dictated by the state. And so I do think that one of the things that Christian nationalism uh, could correct very well the progressive liberal failure is that it believes in borders, and it reestablishes borders, and it believes that immigration should be connected to the benefit of the host community. But don't listen to the siren calls of people that say all immigration is bad. Out of control immigration is bad, but immigration that fits a need and is filtered to fit a need, including a cultural need, is not necessarily a bad thing, and you shouldn't chuck the baby out with the bathwater.
I, I would say certain types of immigration has been a net negative for us. If you look at,
I would agree. Yeah.
yeah, I would say if you look at certain, obviously with the with certain Islamic communities and so on and such forth. Yeah, I don't see them. I see them more as a net negative. It's a long-term problem.
Yeah, I think, but again, it's kind of like we're slipping into this discourse about immigration. But what we really need to be talking about is how do we create families? How do we strengthen families in our communities? How do
That is
we
true.
create
That is
childbearing families? That's where the
no, that is
conversation
true.
really needs to be, because if you want a long-term fix, that's the topic we need to be talking about.
But we
You
do
know,
have a
that's
growing
the
Muslim
long-term fix.
population. But we do have a growing Muslim population, right? That we're, in my opinion, if when they get above 10%, that's when this countries will be completely destabilized.
Well, I mean, I think when you look at other examples, it's more than 10%. It's more like closer to 50%. But you start to see real, I mean, you see problems at 4%. Look to France. France is, I think, around 10%, and look at the problems that are happening in France. So there is
Yeah.
definitely an issue there. Um, but I do think that we need to have a government that's strong enough to tear up a lot of international treaties, to go against the grain of progressive Western thinking around these topics. But I'm trying to suggest to everybody that we might need to have a much deeper conversation around why we've stopped having children. I think there was a report out about two years ago, maybe a year ago, in which, when it accounted for the deductions of natural births from births from deaths, and it had accounted and taken those out of the equation, and when it had accounted for increases in the population by immigration versus increase in the population of births over deaths, the number of births that had contributed to increase in the population was less than 20,000. Now, that doesn't mean that there was only 20,000 children born, but it was only that there was 20,000, less than 20,000 more children born than people that died in the same year. That's a massive problem, right? And we need to have a much deeper understanding of where families have gone wrong. And part of the problem is, particularly amongst working class communities, is we don't prize families. What we prize is sexual conquests, sexual experiences, alcohol, you know, getting some money and going out and enjoying ourselves as individuals, rather than building strong family units. And we need to repent of a lot of the cultural sort of baggage that we picked up from the boomer generation that
But
has not is not.
they're two
Well,
different things, though, right, Bob? Having a stable family and having children, they're two separate things, right? Because if you look at the especially the white working class children, they are kind of, well, they're having more children than the white middle class. Now, the
I'm
stable
sorry, but
family
why?
part, yeah.
Well, the thing is, strong families do lead to more wealth. Strong
Yeah,
family
of course, yeah.
units are tend to do better in life. Strong family units tend to see their children do better in education. Strong family units tend to provide greater social cohesion. And so the thing is, you can address the cobwebs or you can address the spider. And if we would only debate this question about the family as fiercely as we debate the question about immigration, we'd be on the path to fixing the problem. But the thing is, it's a long-term answer, which means that obviously you've got to have short-term to medium-term measures. And when you think about immigration from a Christian perspective, one thing that we don't do is villainize people because they happen to have a different ethnicity. Like that's just, again, really sort of troglodyte, really dumb kind of logic. An Afro-Caribbean who can speak English is going to
Mm.
be much easier to integrate into a British society than a Pole who might be white but who can't speak English, you know, or an Albanian who might be white but can't speak English.
But the
And
cool,
if and
but
the thing is, because we are not having children, that our
Yeah.
choices are that either we accept massive gaps, that we accept massive gaps in the economy in terms of skills and labor, which is one option. That is an option to us, but the result of that is you then have massive institutions that need to be retracted, so a smaller NHS, a smaller welfare state, a smaller care service, less restaurants, less cafes, less bars, less pubs. That's one option, massive contraction, and we all live poorer, but you live poorer without immigrants, or you have immigrants. The other problem
Yeah,
is that we have low aspiration in our families. Too many working class families are quite happy to just let their kids grow up with low aspiration and not want to achieve. Why aren't you why don't we teach our kids to aspire to be the next brain surgeon, or to aspire to be a barrister, or aspire to be a leading scientist? Why are we happy to let our children grow up thinking that it's okay, it's an achievement to go and work in a call center or go and work in a factory? Like, we've got to take a hard look at ourselves if we want to fix these problems.
yeah, but Bob, just to go back to the point you said in regards to the Jamaican and the Polish person, right? If Britain became 70% Jamaican, it's no longer Britain, right? They might speak English, but it's not Britain anymore, is it? Because culturally we've been replaced. So
Yeah, but but the thing is, right, if you're not having children, you're going to be replaced by someone, aren't you? Like, again, we can't get
that's
away
what
from the fact.
that's one theory. Yeah, that's one theory. That's not.
Yeah, but the point is, if you're not having children, you're going to get replaced by somebody. That's just a fact.
But I think
So
but I think even from the
until we
atheist,
address the
sorry, Bob,
children issue, until we
yeah.
address the marriage and children issue, you're not going to ultimately find a solution to the problem.
But has the balance swung too far the other way? Have I got feedback? I don't
No,
know.
not really. I think you sound all right.
Oh, okay, sorry. But look, I agree with what you're saying, right? That is the way to um, restructure our society, and that is the way to fix things, right? By people resubscribing to people taking a step closer back to God is the answer, right? It will
Yeah.
rebalance our society, and it will protect us against the liberalism and all these other things that have destroyed our societies. But what I'm saying is, we're at the stage now where, have we gone past that point? Do we have to look at it from the perspective of we have to with I think people on the right, Christian or non-Christian, will both agree that abortion has to be banned, right? I think that's pretty much that. Is that the point that we're getting
Well,
to
do
here?
a poll of
That
your
is
audience. Why don't you ask them? Like, if I may, Dave, why don't we ask the audience to say whether they agree with banning abortion? One, yes. Two, no, in the comments. So if you agree that we should ban abortion, put a one. If you disagree we should ban abortion, put a two.
yeah, that'll be interesting to see what they say.
Yeah, so, guys, put a one or a two, please. One, you agree we should ban abortion. Two, no, we shouldn't ban abortion.
Someone's put 1.5. There's always someone who's got to be a bit awkward.
Yeah. Now, notice how many people are voting two, and that's the
True.
problem.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
That's the problem. And this is why we've got this situation where the elites of our society are, I mean, like I say, I think the problem has moved past mere economics now. In the past, immigration very much was connected to economics. I think now it's connected to ideology. It's almost ideological. They see the world as a giant resource spreadsheet, and everyone can move, because the internationalist elites, who are not Jews, but the internationalist elites treat the world like an international free market, and so it's become more ideological, and I do recognize that. And I think as Christian nationalists, we're very much against this idea of just letting people move anywhere they want just because they want to. Immigration has to be controlled based upon what benefits the community. But when you're in such massive decline as the United Kingdom is, because we are in demographic collapse. It's not we might be in demographic collapse. We are in demographic collapse. You've only really got two choices on how to deal with that. You accept a shrinking society and you shrink your society, or you use immigration to fill in the gaps. you know. And so in the short to medium term, unless we as a society made a conscious choice all to live poorer with less support and less resources and less help, then we would have to use immigration to the short to medium term until we get our society back on track in terms of creating strong families and having children. And so, I would be in favour of an immigration policy that factors in things like a person's culture, a person's values, and favours those who adhere to a Judeo-Christian tradition. And then obviously you would add things on like, do they already know English? Because that's quite important. And do they have a skill that the country needs that it can't fill itself? So of course, when you hear these stories about kebab shops importing workers to work in a kebab shop, that's ridiculous, because obviously that's a low-skilled job and it should be filled by someone in this country. But the other problem is you've got these high-skilled jobs that sadly we are not, because A, we're not having enough children, and B, we're not giving our children aspiration to fill high-level jobs. We end up having a lack of them, and then you're importing people to fill that. And there's no easy way out of this. There's only a long-term process, And the question is, how much short to immediate term do you want to suffer in dealing with a long-term systematic problem?
I think the vast majority of the Boris wave were low skilled. I think the majority of them was like care workers, and a lot of them have gone on to be on benefits and stuff, which is no benefit to us whatsoever. Which is which I would never understand. But this is where it gets a bit more cynical, Bob, because what you're saying is very logical, and I can definitely understand what you're saying. But it's like, why? Like the certain types of people that they're bringing here, like surely, right? We've got a lot to offer. We've got a very high GDP. We could pick and choose from where we want people in the world, but we're letting in like some of the worst people. That's what doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I'm not saying that I often get, and I can see it in the comments as well. I often get bad faith interlocutors on this kind of topic who put into my mouth words that I have not said. And, I've seen some of the silly comments in the comment section. People saying, oh, he believes that we should be replaced by people from the third world. Oh, like this idea that I want demographic replacement. Really stupid comments from people who don't listen and don't appreciate what you're saying. Because I agree with you that the British elites have lost control of the immigration process. Just because I'm not someone who wants to live in a hermit kingdom doesn't mean that I'm in favour of porous borders and a weak immigration policy. I think that we, precisely for the reasons that you've said, that immigration should be based on recruiting where we need them, the best of people from around the world, but the best of people from around the world that would also add to and strengthen the Judeo-Christian culture of the land. And the fact of the matter is that an Afro-Caribbean man from the Bahamas is going to contribute more to our Judeo-Christian culture than an Albanian Muslim or a Syrian Muslim, even if they had the same IT qualifications or were at the same level of being a brain surgeon. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I definitely understand. I think, and I definitely, agree with what you're saying. And I don't believe, what these people say about you. You want to flood the country with loads of like people from abroad and stuff. I don't agree with that. But I think with certain people, it's the numbers are so large now. They whenever they hear any type of bringing someone here, their brains kind of like short wire a little bit. Where it's
I get it.
Just too much.
But the patriotic community's got to do better. Like, we're not going to win by just having knee-jerk reactions to everything we don't like. We've got to think long term. And we've also, I think the patriotic community needs to kind of separate itself a bit from the rest of society and start to organize itself as its own community, you know. And because we're not being cared for by the state, really. We're being placated by the state, and we're basically ignored and shuffled off into a corner, and we're often villainized for our stances on things, and so I think that we've got to learn a little bit from liberation theology, which basically is something that grew up in Latin America, and basically for the incredibly poor of Latin America that were just ignored by the elites of their countries. When, well, we're not going to wait for the elites to help us sort out sewage and garbage and housing and electricity. We're going to find our own solutions to all of these problems. And I think that our working class communities need to start organizing similarly, so that rather than waiting for the state to deal with our problems, we start organizing ourselves to deal with our problems. But that means that we need to have an honest look about what our problems are. And not all of our problems are someone else's fault. There are a lot of our problems that are someone else's fault, but some of our problems are our own fault. And
yeah,
one of the
decline,
things,
the decline started with us, right?
yeah, we made choices as a society.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
we're living in the wake of the choices that were made in the 1960s and 1970s
yeah.
by people who are now collecting their pensions. And we're still living out that kind of paradigm. And what we need to do is we need to live a different kind of paradigm. We need to organize our communities by a different paradigm. And I would say that Christian nationalism is that paradigm. And the thing is, the advantage to Christian nationalism over, say, ethno-nationalism or civic nationalism is that over civic nationalism is that it doesn't inculcate us to be dependent upon a state that's already decided to abandon us, you know. And with ethno-nationalism, it means that we're not trying to build something based upon something as shallow as the color of somebody's skin, but rather upon a deeper shared Christian values that is native to this land and is deeply encoded in its constitutional frameworks and its deep history. That means that also we get to sidestep the accusation that you're just a racist, because we're genuinely not racist, but then at the same time still oppose the liberalism that is killing the West. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense.
Can we address the because I'm plagued with this all the time. I get people constantly, they try to attack me, try to push me into position because I don't subscribe to this theory that Jewish people are the root of all evil. And I find those people like just to be a special type of cancerous people. And it's so poisonous. And I just can't subscribe to that way of thinking as well, because it is so disturbed. And I don't know, but unfortunately, we have to live with these people because they are unfortunately always seem to be there. But they are the rot, and they are what poisons the right, because
Yeah,
I'm sure
yeah.
you experience
There's
it.
these kind of conspiracy theories that the Jews are controlling everything takes a special kind of stupid. The Jews make up about 14 million people in the global population. They are they're peppered in amongst the elites. That's absolutely true. But then there are Christians peppered in amongst the elites, and there are Muslims peppered in amongst the elites, and a whole bunch of elites are just atheist. If anything, this is an atheist conspiracy. And no, not all of the elites are communist. That's also, or Marxist. That's just not true. Though a lot of the elites are progressive. And the other thing that people need to recognize is that there's more than one group of elites. The elites that are running Russia are not the same elites that are running the Western world. And the elites that are running Africa are not the same elites, the elites that are running Asia. There's different elites in different parts of the world, and they're constantly vying with one another. So this idea that there's some grand global Jewish conspiracy that's controlling everything, it is the moon is made of cheese kind of conspiracy nonsense. These people might as well go and put some tinfoil on their head and sit in their mother's attic. It's not intelligent thinking. But what it does do, all this chatter about, all this constant, oh, you believe in that we're going to be, you support ethnic replacement, oh, you're a Zionist, oh, the Jews are controlling everything and you just don't know it. What it does is it takes up bandwidth. It takes up bandwidth and it causes distraction from talking about the real issues. And the real issues are things like immigration. The real issues are things like the loss of our Judeo-Christian heritage. The real issues are the fact that we are not creating families and our families are not having enough children. The real issues are that we raise families with low aspiration. The real issues is that there's an endemic of substance abuse in working class families. Those are the real issues. Like white kids and working class kids in general do poorly in school. That's a real issue. The real issue is the fact that we as a community are being villainized by the social elites of this country who want to villainize us all as like the bogeyman, and turn the whole of society against us. How do we counter that narrative? These are the kinds of real issues we need to be thinking about. And all of these people that are banging on with their silly conspiracy theories and their one-dimensional rhetoric are just taking up bandwidth and distracting us from talking about the bigger problems. So we've got to do better as a community. Otherwise, we don't win. It's that simple.
Yeah, that's what I love about your message, because you are genuinely trying to collectivize people and bring people together, because obviously there's strength in numbers, right? So if we actually did, but
Yeah.
I had someone the other day say to me, why are you worshipping a Jewish god? I was like, flipping out, what is going on?
Yeah, I mean the reality is the reality is that these kind of sound bites, they sound provocative, but they don't display much depth of thought. And the reality is, and actually there is a kind of anti-intellectualism in working class communities. I come from a working class community, guys, so I'm speaking from first-hand experience. There's an anti-intellectualism amongst working class communities that doesn't help us, and I think we need to go beyond protest. Like, these big marches that people go on, yeah, they serve a purpose. They're good. They're not bad. They do something. They're not for nothing, but
they don't change much.
They don't change much. And so the bit that I would love to see contributed to this is the establishment of base communities where working class patriotic communities organize in their local community to deal with their local problems. And I believe that the Confessing Church of England, which is the only church that has 100% backed the patriotic movement, is the church that we can organize within. Because whereas other churches have taken various degrees of towards the patriotic movement, the Confessing Church of England under Bishop Kai has come in and got right behind the patriotic movement. And so if you're looking for a church, guys, get in touch with Bishop Kai and say that you're interested in setting up a house group.
In regards to politics, Bob, I've seen you at one point, you seemed like you was backing reform, then you kind of seemed like you started to support Restore. Where do you stand in regards to that?
Yeah, I kind of flip-flop, is the truth. Because I don't personally like Nigel Farage's virtue. He's not a particularly virtuous man. He hasn't got that kind of consistency that I respect. He's betrayed a lot of people in his political career, and he's betrayed, and this is very indicative, he's betrayed a number of his wives of the past. And, a man who's willing to betray his wife, is it surprising that he betrays his political allies as well? Like that's a connection that we've got to get back to, that Christianity gave us, that if you betray your wife in political office, you should lose your political office. Because if your wife can't trust you, well, how can the country trust you? And that was something that got ruptured and broken during the time of Tony Blair, when Robin Cook had an affair but didn't get the sack, which kind of broke that tradition. But we need to kind of get back to that. And when I went off him, and then I was like, yeah, let's go restore. But what I saw at the Macclesfield by-election was the first real test of restore versus reform. And it ended up with Andy Burnham getting elected as MP. And so I'd like to see a couple more tests to see whether restore can replace reform, or whether it's just going to split the vote. And if I think after a few more tests in by-elections, so, Nigel Farage calling his by-election in his own office, in his own constituency, provides another test. But if restore can't beat reform, then that means we end up with a split vote. And rather than a split vote, I'd rather have tactical alliances where, there's an assessment of who's gaining traction, and then the other one bows out to give their support to the leading horse in each race and in each constituency. And that needs to be decided now, before an election is called, long before an election is called, so people can get into that way of thinking about it.
I think when you look in regards to, especially with the issue of Islam, Rupert Lowe is the only MP that is willing to actually put his head above the parapet and call it out, right? And Restore are definitely making moves to do things to try to stop the Islamic creep that's currently going on in this country, right? The banning of halal, all different, the banning of the burqa. There's small things, but they're at least making steps. Nigel Farage will never do anything like that.
No, he won't.
Nigel Farage is on record as saying, if we don't, what does he say? If we don't politically include the Muslim population, we'll lose. So doesn't fill me with confidence.
Yeah, and I'm not. I think that the way that you defeat Islamization is that you build a strong Christian society. So, like the way to beat Islamization is that you say, look, this is a Christian country. And in a Christian country, we don't have ritual slaughter of animals. So we're banning halal, we're banning kosher. In a Christian country, we don't allow a pagan message to be blasted into people's rooms through megaphones. So we're going to ban amplified adhan. In a Christian country, we don't do cousin marriages. So we're banning cousin marriages. In a Christian country, we don't do child genital mutilation, so we're banning circumcision. In a Christian country, we don't do, and you basically organize society according to Christian values and beliefs. Yeah. And when you do that, you create an environment that restricts and limits the ability for Islamization. The problem of the sort of brotherhood, the Islamist Brotherhood's penetration into the state, the reason why that has happened is because ideologically, liberal secularism believes that everybody just treats their religion as a private matter, and that people don't come into the state with religious ideological intentions. And so when people do, from a Muslim background, when people do, the liberal secular state is blind to it. Now, it's important to point something out. If a Christian does the same, the liberal secularist will go, you shouldn't mix religion and politics. So why then are they still blind when it's clear that there are some Muslims who are doing the same? And the reason for it is because to a liberal progressive, religion and ethnicity are the same thing. And the worst sin possible to a liberal progressive is being a racist. And so because they see Islam and being non-white as being synonymous, they
Yeah.
don't want to be accused of being racist by opposing obvious Muslim Brotherhood, Islamist kind of penetration into the state. Well, Christianity has none of those hang-ups. None, right? It just doesn't have those hang-ups. And so it would be able to deal with the penetration of any non-Christian ideology into the state. And so it gives you a more robust state in a way that liberalism doesn't. And the problem with a lot of civic nationalists is that they default to a classical liberalism. And as I've explored in numerous debates, and I'm happy to debate anyone who wants to have that debate, classical liberalism has no classical liberal reasons to stop Islamization. And that's why you see Islamization occurring in America. It's why you see it occurring in France and Germany. And France and America are the two examples par excellence of classical liberalism, you know. But yet neither of those countries have been able to prevent Islamization. And we aren't preventing Islamization here for exactly the same reasons, because the governing principle of our society is liberal secularism. And that's the problem. So you've got to think deeper to go and, you know, engage with the problems that we're facing.
Yeah, it's definitely in regards. Well, my position. Actually, I can't. I just think that reform or a continuation of the establishment. To be honest with you, I can't. I don't have faith in them, so I'm not. I'm not worried or concerned about the splitting of the vote things. I think a reform government, they'll do a few different things, but they're not going to be the change that we need to
They're
stop us
just
from
a
going in the
they're just a
direction we're
kind of
going in.
Thatcherite conservatism, really. I think,
Yeah,
you know,
if
and
if that.
yeah, well, I mean, maybe I'm a bit more charitable than you. I think they probably are a Thatcherite conservatism, but the problem is that isn't the answer that we need. We need a party that's much more radical, and so my first preference would be that Restore wins. But if Restore doesn't win, I'd rather have Reform than Labour or a Labour Green alliance. And the thing that I see is that the left is much better at unifying when it feels the need to than the right, you know. And I think that's a cultural change that we need to make. We might need to hold our nose as we get closer to the election and possibly vote Reform to stop Labour, even though I would rather see a Restore government.
I see where you're coming from. A lot of people feel that way, but again, I can't. Yeah, I just don't see reform doing. I see reform as being establishment. I think Nigel's compromised. To be honest with you, I think he's compromised, and I think yeah, I think he's a coward.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you that I think he's a coward as well. Um, I don't see the virtue of courage or conviction within him. Um, but I also think that his limitations are maybe connected because I think maybe he had a brush with the deep state in the UK and he realised that there really is a deep state and that deep state will get you if it wants to. And I think that scared him witless. And I think that's
Yeah,
why he's rolled back.
I think that happened when he got debanked. It seemed shaken. He was a bit shaken by it. Yeah.
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 But you know, like it's easy when you're not facing those pressures to go, "Oh, you're a wimp."
Oh,
But
without a doubt, of
you
course.
know,
Yeah, 100%. But
we none of
you
us know
can't.
how we'll do until we're tested. Do you know what I'm
But
saying?
that's what. But that is an unforgivable statement, right? If we will lose to Islam, it's like, come on. Even if you can't be public. Yeah, you just can't say things like that. That's
Well,
yeah.
I think it shows a lot where his mind is. He sounds like a man already beaten, you know. And that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't want him as prime minister. But like I say, if the alternative was him or Andy Burnham, I'd rather have him. You know, my first choice though would be Restore. You know, and I'm hoping to set up a Christians for Restore group. um,
Oh, nice.
to work within Restore. And so you might hear me organize something like that. We might put out an opening event that we invite Christians to, and Christians who are already within Restore to join, for the purposes of being a kind of Christian pressure group within Restore to try and get as many Christian policies and Christian grounded policies into the Restore manifesto. You
What
know,
kind of things would they be?
well, it would be things like, I mean, I can, off the top of my head, I'll rattle off a brief list, but please bear in mind, I am doing this ad hoc and
Yeah,
off the cuff. So these
it's not
might not all be
official
well
policy.
thought out. Yeah, definitely not official policy, but it might also need a lot more work. So it'd be things like, for instance, getting control of immigration, filtering immigration with a cultural and religious test, as well as a skills test and language test. It would be things like supporting the family and supporting childbearing families. It would be about breaking the connection of benefits to worklessness. It would be about tackling poverty, caring for the environment, changing the constitutional arrangement with the Church of England, either by reforming the Church of England or replacing the Church of England so that it's actually a Christian church. It would be about things like preventing IVF, preventing euthanasia, no longer creating a sort of multicultural, let's celebrate everything kind of attitude, but rather we're going to celebrate our Christian culture civically in society, and creating an identity for all Brits around that, like that's the only game in town and you can participate in it as much as you want to, but we're not going to fund and sponsor anything else. Building alliances with other Christian countries, supporting persecuted Christians abroad, um, you know, having a system that rewards virtuous behavior whilst in some way penalizing or just not rewarding behaviors that are connected to vices. you know it might be things like banning betting shops and alcohol shops from poor communities, because those communities don't need that kind of crap. Investing.
Bob, you do know the middle class have got quite a taste for illegal substances, right, Bob?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely. Mike,
they
Mike,
might not be as open or as
yeah,
seen,
yeah.
but they're
Oh no, absolutely. And the reason why I keep talking about the working class is two reasons. One, because working class patriot, the main
yeah.
audience I suspect is going to be working class patriots. So I'm talking about it from that kind of perspective. But
Okay.
also, I come from a working class community, and that is my first concern is working class folk, because I come from that kind of background. But I don't. I come from that kind of background, but I don't come at it with rose tinted glasses. you know. But you're right. The middle classes also have got their own kind of problems, and I actually, I would allow policing to be based upon the vices of the different communities. Which is not something which is politically taboo in our country. So I would allow the police to do stop and search, and yes, that would probably fall harder on black communities than white communities, but I would police and create policies that deal with the distinct vices of each community. And so when that lands on the Muslim community, that would be child rape, and issues around that. But amongst the white working class community, it would be things like substance abuse. Amongst white middle classes, it would be all this trans nonsense and the child abuse that comes from that and flows from that, as well as the fact of tax avoidance and other kinds, which is more like a low middle class thing. Different communities have got their own vices, And I think that our policing and our social policies need to be attuned to the vices of different communities. Not rather than just thinking every community has all the same problems, which they clearly don't.
Yeah, not a one size fits all approach. Yeah.
Yeah, one size fits all doesn't work. You know,
So, Bob, when did you first start going to Speaker's Corner, and what was your reason for going?
I started going about 10 years ago, and I went primarily to help Dr. J. Smith, who was an Indian born, but from an American family evangelist. So he was born in India, from an American missionary family. And he came to the UK as a missionary to basically do what the British Church wasn't doing, and that is tackling the Islamists that are basically were having a field day at Speaker's Corner. And I came to support him. But funnily enough, on the first week that I came to support him, he said, "Great to see you. I'm leaving next week. It's my last week." And so,
Exactly.
literally, my first week at the Speaker's Corner was his last week at Speaker's Corner. And I just picked up from where he left off.
So, was it as hostile then as it is now? Because I can imagine it was, right? You 10 years ago, it was pretty much it was a cesspit, really.
Yeah, there's been I think between I'm not I'd have to count it up in my head, somewhere between 4 and 6 murder attempts in the last 6 years. Sorry, in the
Yeah.
last 9 years. So we're averaging one every other year, nearly. Um, and the murder attempts have invariably been carried out by people who we have good reasons to think they might be Muslims, and invariably, apart from in one case, have always targeted Christians. And these include trying to set somebody on fire at the corner, stabbing someone at the corner, trying coming with a machine gun to shoot people at Speaker's Corner,
Oh God.
as well as other attacks, battery and assault as well. There's been, Dr. J. Smith himself was stabbed at Speaker's Corner. Another guy received an Osman warning. He's not a Christian, but he received an Osman warning, which is when the police tell you that there's a credible threat that someone's trying to kill you. So, Speaker's Corner was pretty hostile. And when I first went there 9 years ago, there was a definite attempt by a small number of Muslims at the corner to try and bully and drive out everyone who wasn't a Muslim.
Yeah.
And they drove away, on a number of occasions, they've driven away the Jewish community. They drove away the black identitarian community. Sikhs don't really go down there very much. Atheists, or only a sprinkling of them, and so the only community that held out was the Christian community, and so the Christian community has continued to evangelize there, even though it was incredibly hostile. For a long time, policing has been patchy, and sometimes quite poor, but it seems to have improved a bit, in all honesty, in recent years. In certainly in the last year, I've noticed a better job being done by the police. Um, and the thing is, we Christians are winning, basically. When I went there about 9 years ago, Muslims were releasing Shahada videos nearly every single week. Every single week, it was like someone's become a Muslim, someone's become a Muslim, someone's become a Muslim. Sometimes 2 or 3 on the same Sunday, and those have pretty much dried up. They're not happening now.
Yeah.
And, when I used to go down to the corner, Muslims used to boast that no Muslim ever becomes a Christian. But they don't say that anymore because there's been so many Muslims who become Christian, both at the corner and because of the corner, and have then come down to the corner to go, hey, I'm a Christian as well. So we are we're doing a much better job now than we were 9 years ago. And that's because we've taken a different approach. We've adopted the principles of muscular Christianity.
Yeah, in the past, because I've watched Speaker's Corner over the years, and I've spoken to a few people from there, like Jedi and Raj Speaker's Corner and people like that. And it seemed like
Yeah.
at one point the police were actively targeting the people who was being harassed, which I'm sure must have been at that moment in time, must have been very hard for you to be in that situation, because it looked like you guys had no support whatsoever.
So I think it was a combination of we need, one of the discussions that we need to have in this country is about policing around free speech, because basically at the moment there is a veto of the mob in effect. So the police are charged with keeping the king's peace. It's what they say in their constable's oath, and they therefore, if there's a mob that protesting one or two individuals or a smaller group is being protested by a bigger group, the smaller group is the one that ends up being dealt with by the police, or the individual is the one that ends up being dealt with by the police, because that is the path to not having any problems. That's the easiest path to not having any problems. And at the corner there was this issue of lazy policing, that just didn't do anything. I remember once being assaulted by about 15 Muslims with two other Christian brothers. And I went to the police and I said, I've just been assaulted. I can identify one of my attackers. I'd like him to be arrested and I'd like to press charges. And the police basically just let him waddle out of the park and didn't even try to chase him. And then turned around to me and said, would you like to give a statement? At which point I gave up with the police. And so it's a combination of policing priorities, meaning that it's easier always to tackle the victim than it is the mob, and also lazy policing of not wanting to tackle, the problems because they're just small and minor as far as the police are concerned. But I've noticed a change. I've got to admit, I've noticed a change, and the police seem to be on it a bit more than they were.
Yeah, I can remember when Jedi was like chased around the park, so to speak. And
Yep.
I don't think he's been back since, and I
No.
think Raj left as well. So it is testament to yourself and how brave you are, because I can imagine, like you said, and also saying that you've been attacked there as well. So yeah, because watching it never looks like a safe place.
It isn't a safe place. It feels a bit safer these days, but it certainly wasn't 9 years ago. And again, I think that's down to the fact that it's down to a couple of things. I think one, it's because the police are just doing a better job. Someone's actually kicked the police up the arse, and they're actually on it a bit more. But also it's about a lot of the Islamists that went to the park have stopped going because they've all fallen out with one another. And when they stopped going, they took their thugs with them. Their thugs stopped going as well. And so a lot of the Muslims that go to the park now, even though they're probably, many of them are Islamist sympathetic, they're not as radical, and they're not as able as well. And so, and because of the kind of videos that were coming out of Speaker's Corner, we've got different kinds of Christians going to Speaker's Corner. Christians who are physically stronger, more willing to stand up for themselves, much better able to debate and argue, and they've gone there with a mission. They're going there with a mission of defeating Islam in public debate. And they're doing a lot better job of it than just standing on ladders and shouting at everybody like a lot of Christians do. I'm just wondering, Dave, again, it's your program, bro, so, you feel free to do this however you want, but do you want to maybe take some questions from the audience?
Yep, absolutely. Guys, if you want to fire in your questions. Have you seen anything, Bob, that's thingy?
I just thought it'd be a good opportunity to take some questions from people and let them have an opportunity to ask questions to either of us, or, if they don't want to, you can keep firing your questions, but,
No.
Just a thought.
Hopefully, you guys do get your question. Was there? I'll actually this, and hopefully, in the time tomorrow, I will have another question. Was the Hatun period? Was that the most stressful time there, or?
There were times when Hatun was there that was stressful, but yeah, I mean that would definitely overlapped with the sort of intense stress time of Speaker's Corner. Funnily enough, like because bless her, she towards the end of her time at Speaker's Corner, she became a bit of a shock jockey, and her way of engagement was basically to try and outrage people and then get them in debate. But that obviously created situations where people who had Muslims who had never ever been confronted with free speech before because they didn't come from countries where that was common or where Islam could be openly criticized before, just didn't know how to handle it, and so they'd either attack her or they'd threaten her, and so the Christians then would have to defend her. And so ironically, her coming to the end of her time at Speaker's Corner actually reduced the temperature at Speaker's Corner as well.
Yeah, it was. It did. Yeah, from the outside looking in, it did seem very. So we got here. Don't know what this is.
Yeah.
If civic nationalism founded on Christian values, how on earth do you think using them again will have a different outcome?
Well, the problem with that is that the problem with the question is it assumes something that's false. Civic nationalism is not built on Christian values. It's built on Enlightenment values. And that is why classical liberalism is no more an effective response to the problems that we face today than progressive liberalism is. Christian values are different from Enlightenment values. So the Enlightenment values things like individualism, rationalism, empiricism, technology, the nation state. These are some of the core values of civic nationalism. But Christian values are things like, the pursuance of the kingdom of God, the pursuance of holiness, the family, the church, solidarity with persecuted Christians, a care for the poor. So Christian values are not to be confused with civic nationalism. I am talking about Christian nationalism, not civic nationalism. They are two different things. And I am as much against civic nationalism as you are, Derpitz.
Bob, do you think you will speak more about cultural Christians and what the Bible refers to as men of good will, i.e., those who don't believe but live their life in alignment with Christian values?
I mean, if you want me to, I can. Yeah. So Christianity, the Christian faith has a category for people who aren't Christian, but who decide to align with and support the church. So Liam Tufts, for example, would be an example of this. He's an atheist, he's not a Christian, but he supports the church. And there is a place for that. If you're not a Christian, but you support the church, you can align with the church as the church fights against poverty, as the church fights against abortion, as the church fights against euthanasia, as the church fights against Islamization, as the church fights against Marxism, as the church fights against fascism or ethno-nationalism. You can align with the church in its causes, and that means you are a person of goodwill. And if you're someone who is broadly trying to live your life according to Christian values and beliefs, even if you don't necessarily have those beliefs as your own conviction, then you would be what we call a cultural Christian. And there is a place for you, within a grander coalition of building a Christian civilization. But I've got to say, it's very hard to sustain Christian values if you don't really believe in Christian doctrine, because your values emerge from your doctrines. And so if your doctrines aren't Christian, at some point you will lose your Christian values, which is exactly what happened with liberalism. Classical liberalism, was an attempt to have Christian values without Christian beliefs. And that's why classical liberalism failed and morphed into progressive liberalism.
White Knight says, "Hi Bob, may I ask why you wish to get rid of ethno-nationalists from the right of Brit Pole? I find it worrying." Hold on, let me put that on stage. Sorry. I
Yeah,
find
just
it.
put them up. We'll talk about them then.
Yeah, I find it worrying, and I am one, and so is my husband.
Yeah. So ethno-nationalists are enemies to the church because they would seek to villainize, criminalize, and harm Christians who are black, Asian. You know, if you go to America, one of the chief persecutors of the Christian church is the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan are white supremacists who attack black churches, right? Now, when I stand up to Islamist Islamists in Pakistan bombing Pakistani churches, everybody taps me on the back and applauds me, for doing that. But why then should I turn a blind eye to white supremacists attacking black churches in America? You know, and the fact that white white ethno-nationalists often try to um, back devalue Christians just because they're black or just because they're Asian. That's why I'm opposed to ethno-nationalism, and I'm as opposed to ethno-nationalism as I am opposed to Islamism. Because I am for the church, and that means I am against the enemies of the church, and the church is not just white people.
Hold on. Are you all right reading it, Bob? Yeah.
Yep. Okay, what was Tan about? Was he a setup? No, Tan was just some guy with borderline, I would say borderline mental health issues, who went on a bit of a trip because he'd never had so much attention before in his life, and the little bit of fame that he got to his head. But but he wasn't a setup. He was a genuine character. And when I say character, I mean that in every sense of the word. And I believe that basically he was going to get prosecuted in the UK, was given a deal of if you leave the UK, it's okay, and we'll not chase you. But then he came back. I don't know if he came back legally or illegally, but when he came back, he got arrested. And I don't know what happened to him after that. I heard rumours that he was imprisoned, and I heard rumours that he was stabbed in prison, but I don't know if any of that is true. But he wasn't a setup. He was a genuine guy, but he was a genuine guy who, to me, to my appearance, had maybe some borderline mental health issues, who went a bit crazy, like not crazy in the clinical sense, but a bit crazy in the common sense of, he was on a trip because of all the popularity and the fame that he suddenly was exposed to.
Do you want to return to Derpits, or should we move on to another
No,
question?
you choose the questions, bro, and I'll just answer whichever ones you put up. I don't mind who asks. Which aren't Christian values. Those are Anglo-Saxon values, hence why they are missing from all non-Anglo-Saxon, non-Anglo-Christian countries. Christians are the persecutors. I mean, that's utter nonsense. But this is the point with ethno-nationalists, is that they just don't know any history. Alfred the Great was creating a project of building a Christian nation in this country that bound people, church, and king together in a tripod. And the idea was that it would be a Christian people under a Christian king living by Christian laws. And I would just invite people to look into the Alfred the Great story. And it was in a reaction to an invasion by Danes, pagan Danes, that led to this kind of ultra-Christian movement. And Alfred the Great's campaign against the Danes was a crusade before we had the word crusade. And when him, his son, and his grandson finally completed the project, and his grandson became Rex Angelorum, or King of the English, he was governing a multi-ethnic kingdom that included migrants from Scandinavia, native Celts, who were the original inhabitants of the land, and Saxons, who had invaded centuries before and settled in the land, in the same way that the Vikings were just doing at the time. And the church and Christian culture allowed these three different groups to be amalgamated into a people that we now call English, and who are the ancestors of ourselves. And so it was the church and Christianity that allowed a common language to emerge, common culture, common festivals, common values, common teachings. But the idea that these are just unique to the idea that these are Anglo-Saxon values is utterly rubbish. You know, Christian values are not unique to Anglo-Saxon culture. If you compare the Ethiopian kingdoms, you know, to the rest of Africa, Ethiopia was strides above the rest of Africa. In fact, Ethiopia alone was the one country in Africa that managed to defeat a major European power in the rush for Africa during colonialism. And it did that because of its deep-rooted Christian identity and heritage. So it is not something that is unique to these are not Anglo-Saxon values. These are Christian values. And I know, bro, because I bet you I've spoken to more Ethiopian Christians than you. And I bet you, and I know from those conversations that we share values because of our Christian identity. Okay, Bob, what are your views on the death penalty? Should there be a referendum? Please ignore if you've covered this already. I join late. No, on my channel, I recently had a debate with another Christian about the death penalty. And I believe in the death penalty, and I support the idea of the death penalty. But I believe that the death penalty should be applied in a restricted sense. So I would only want to introduce it to the prison population. And it should only be applied if a prisoner commits a major offence inside the prison system. And the reason for that is because the death penalty is the ultimate sanction, obviously. And it should be used to defend the rest of society from harm. But prison is your first line of defence. But then obviously prisoners themselves are a society. And if prison fails to defend prisoners, then that's when you apply the death penalty, because clearly prison didn't work in that case. So that's where I stand on the death penalty. I agree, but not on your views on early term abortion and euthanasia. I think of myself as a cultural Christian, and I was christened. Catholics are more concerned about abortion than Protestants. Well, I mean, the reality is that there's no way of getting around it. If you're a Christian and you have Christian values, you have to be against abortion. The fact that many Protestants aren't particularly fully au fait in their understanding of where Christian values land on this, and the fact that perhaps the Catholic Church overemphasizes this to the neglect of other causes that they should also be fighting, doesn't actually change the reality that to be Christian means you've got to be pro-life from conception to natural death. And so, you know, there's you just can't get away from that if you're serious about what the apostles teach and about the apostolic tradition. And it comes from the fact that life is made in the image of God, life is the creation of God, life is owned by God, and life is dignified by the incarnation of the Logos into flesh in Jesus Christ. And so that which contradicts this value, such as abortion and euthanasia, are just completely incompatible with a Christian perspective. But it is the fact that the working class, the patriot community, the working class community, and British society as a whole can't free themselves from abortion that we've ended up in a situation that for decades now we have wiped out towns worth of people year after year after year, decade after decade after decade. And that's why we've got immigration levels, in part, not completely, but partially at the levels that we do. Belief in stories is why we are in this mess, whole mess. Well, again, this is the kind of, we need to go a bit deeper, guys, because the thing is, everybody, including you, John, works by stories. You're telling yourself a story right now. You're interpreting the world through a story. Now, I can't pretend to know what your particular story is. It might be something that's very unique to you as an individual. But everyone works by stories because that's how the human mind works. If I ask you, John, what you did yesterday, you'll tell me a story. If I ask you what you're doing right now, you'll tell me a story. If I ask you what you're doing next week, you're going to tell me a story. If I ask you what the purpose of your life is, you'll tell me a story. We think through stories. The problem is, because what I think what you're saying is, you're assuming that story equals fiction and religion equals fictional story. And every one of those assumptions is wrong. Stories don't always equal fiction. That's why you have biographies. That's why you have history. You know, but also religious stories don't equal fiction, because we all live through and work with metaphysical beliefs, regardless of whether those metaphysical beliefs are connected to a deity or not. The fact of the matter is, we all believe, and we all have metaphysical beliefs that are non-corporeal, unverifiable, non-testable, non-experimental, and are beliefs that live in the world of the supernatural. They live outside of material cause and effect, and everyone has them, including yourself. I can't pretend to know what they are because I don't know you, but everybody's got them. So this idea that this catchphrase that, you know, believing in stories is got us into this whole mess. It's not that. It's we believed in the wrong story, and that's how we ended up in the mess that we're in. Would you ban what you deem sectarians from practicing their faith in public, especially if they have Christian view in opposition to your own theologically, evangelism to Roman Catholics? No, I wouldn't. However, I do want to say that sectarianism is of the devil. People that want to divide the body of Christ against itself are doing the devil's work. Satan is called Satan because he is the accuser of the brethren. And sectarians spend their entire life trying to rip apart Christian unity and divide Christian communities against one another, whilst the enemies of all of us as Christians are busy working to oppress the Christian people. And I think if you're dumb enough to think that attacking other Christians is the biggest priority, when we have Islamists penetrating the government who want to impose Sharia law, or Marxists who want to control all of our lives through a super state, you know, if you think that attacking that Roman Catholic congregation down the road and spending your time having, you know, theological debates about, you know, what is the relationship of works to salvation, when you've got Muslims trying to pass laws that you know, or would like to pass laws that make evangelism to Muslims punishable by death, you need your head looking at. You've literally got no sense of triage. You have no sense of relative threat levels, and you're actually doing a great disservice to the entire body of Christ.
But what if you used to advise somebody that something's not? I don't know. Would you advise somebody that I'll be honest, like for me, like the praying to Mary thing?
Yeah.
Is that just something we should just not acknowledge?
No,
just let people live to their own.
Yeah, well, as I said, I mean, I answered the question by saying no, I wouldn't ban people, and that means
not banning. I just mean like giving advice. If you used to advise someone,
So the thing is, like on praying to the saints, for instance, it's not a salvific issue. Your salvation does not depend upon whether you think that the saints can hear your prayers or not.
Okay.
Right? That no one ever goes out into the street and preaches, believe that the saints do or do not hear your prayers, and you will
Yeah.
be saved. No one has ever given that sermon, which means that it isn't a salvific question. It is a secondary question, because the whole debate hinges upon whether the saints alive in heaven can hear the saints alive on earth. That's what the debate is. And I think when you frame it for what it is, you realize it's not as important an issue as some of the other issues as Christians that we face today. Now, that isn't to say that there isn't a debate and a discussion to be had, and that there isn't a right and a wrong answer. And incidentally, I believe in the communion of saints, but it isn't me convincing an evangelical that the saints in heaven can hear his requests for prayer is nowhere near as important as ensuring that that evangelical doesn't get turned into a dhimmi.
Okay.
All Abrahamic religions are terrible and should have no place in Europe. I mean, this is ridiculous. Christianity formed, founded, and shaped Europe. Spain was created as Christians fought for a Christian identity. Portugal was created as Christians fought for a Christian identity. England was created as Christians fought for a Christian identity. Lithuania was created as Christians fought for a Christian identity. Latvia was created because Christians fought for a Christian identity. Estonia was created because Christians fought for a Christian identity. Malta was created because Christians fought for a Christian identity. Greece was created because Christians fought for a Christian identity. Romania was created because Christians fought for a Christian identity. Hungary was created because Christians fought for a Christian identity. Croatia was created because Christians fought for a Christian identity. Serbia was created because Christians fought for a Christian identity. You know, the Holy Roman Empire is what gave birth to France. The Holy Roman Empire and was what gave birth to Prussia, and Prussia is what founded Germany. The Scandinavian countries were created because of Christianity. This nonsense that Abrahamic religions, which is itself a silly claim, because there's only one Abrahamic religion. It's the Judeo-Christian faith. There aren't multiple, so I don't know which all you're talking about. You know, I obviously know you think you're talking about Islam and you think you're talking about Judaism, but that tells me that you don't know what the Abrahamic religion is. But the fact that Christianity shaped all of our languages, shaped our culture, shaped our architecture, shaped our laws, shaped our customs, shaped our festivals, our sense of time, our music, our literature, our philosophy, our educational systems, even our militaries were all shaped by Christianity. So the idea that we should throw out Christianity from Europe tells me that you have literally no understanding of European civilization whatsoever. And these are the kinds of voices that take up bandwidth within the patriotic community, dividing us. They take up time and resources as you wade through this kind of crap, and ultimately they create drag within the patriotic movement as the patriotic movement tries to push towards a healthier society.
But it is a fight that needs to be had right now, Bob. Because
Yeah, absolutely. But we don't need to humour this low level intellect, because this low level intellect is going to harm us. Like Liberty, you don't know anything. You're like, go and read a book about English history. Go and read a book about French history. Go and read a book about the history of Greece or Italy. Honestly. What is the anathema the gospel Paul warns us about? The anathema, well, I mean, the anathema that Paul warns us about, I guess you're referring to Galatians, because that's always the one that sectarians go to. The anathema that Paul warns us about is about changing the gospel. That's the anathema that Paul warns us about.
We just got a lot of
Yeah,
disgruntled F nuts.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
they're
You put
they're
up
in their
you
feelings at the moment.
yeah, you put up the questions that you want to, bro, and I'll just engage with whichever questions you want to put up.
I'm trying to find. Come on, guys, help me out here. Where's the well, thingy's still going. There, I don't know if you think there.
Oh, Luke, the generic broken record of we were always Christian. We weren't. We aren't now. The royals and the elites were. Oh, and the weak cows. I'm sorry, but you just don't know your history. The fact of the matter is that every layer of our society, for nearly 1,000 years, has been Christian. Now, that isn't to say that the people on these islands were always Christian. It's self-evident that that's not true. But that's not the claim that I'm making. So, and this is what I mean by bad faith interaction, is to put words into my mouth that I did not say, because I did not say that we were always Christian. But when Christianity is the most significant influence upon your civilization, to hate upon Christianity is to hate your own civilization. And frankly, I'm just too patriotic to do that. What's your opinion on Norse paganism? I have a few friends who believe in it and I've tried to get them to convert. I just want some tips if you have any on how to explain the Bible better. So the thing that I would suggest, United Kingdom, is that if I can help you engage your friends about Nordic paganism, I would be very happy to book in a Zoom call. You can do that through my website, soldierofchrist.online, and you can book in a Zoom call, and I'd be happy to talk with your friends, with you, all together as a group. I think that this re-interest in Norse paganism is connected to ethno-nationalism, because they kind of think that it's something ethnic. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of what we think Norse paganism is just made up, because the Vikings weren't a particularly literate people and their religion was not particularly literate. It's a bit like the Celtic pagans. They didn't leave lots of written records. And so the truth is, because they didn't leave lots of written records, there's a lot of emendation and guesswork that's done based upon things like burial sites, fortresses, temples where we can find them, and other sacred spaces. And we guess a lot. And we also, fill in the gaps with stuff that's just made up, ironically, probably made up by some Christians somewhere, in their descriptions of the Vikings. And we don't know how accurate those descriptions are. And so a lot of people that are, as it were, in quote marks, practicing Norse paganism are basically practicing something that's been invented in the last sort of 100, 200 years, and it's nonsense, or at least it's not connected to real ancient Norse paganism. It's just a fanfare. The kind of but a much deeper criticism is this idea that we know that creation operates through laws, and those laws mean that those laws tell us obviously that there was something prior to creation, and this which is prior to creation we call God. And surely it makes more sense to worship the one that brought creation about rather than to worship the thing that was created. And that's one of the principal and most basic critiques of paganism. The other thing is, so you've got two critiques of paganism right there, one a historical and one a metaphysical.
There's Silent Matthew Roberts in the chat. You're talking about people being rude or talking down to people. You've been nothing but insulting since you came in the chat. You've conducted yourself in a disgusting way, to be honest. So, you crying now is quite pathetic, really. But I think we've run out of questions, Bob. I don't. It seems to.
All right. If there are any more questions, guys, please do put your questions in the chat.
Yeah.
You
Can
know,
I ask you one question? And this might be
you
a
can
very
ask me as many
stupid.
questions as you like.
This might be a very stupid question, Bob. But how do you be a Christian?
You be a Christian by putting your trust in the Lord Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and committing yourself to being His student, and to working for His kingdom. You know, like the simplest way that I could phrase it is that you become a serious student of Jesus. You believe what He said about Himself, you believe what He says about you, and you believe what He says about the world. And you let that begin to organize your life. The relationship of faith is one of trust, and it's kind of akin to a marriage. You know, when you marry someone, you marry them based on the person that you know, but you trust that in 20 years time that you commit yourself to be with that person in 20 years time, even though you know they're going to change. And so faith is a combination of trust and commitment. And so what you're doing is, when you're a Christian, you're putting your trust and commitment to the Lord Jesus Christ, and you seek to walk that out as a Christian, by primarily pursuing the kingdom of God in your life, in your society, in your community, in your country, in your civilization, in the world. And and so you would, when you've made that commitment, you would approach the church, and the church, you know, you would say that you want to become a Christian, and the church will then, you know, probably want you to do some lessons to make sure that you actually know what you're committing to. And then the church publicly acknowledges that you have the same faith as the church by giving you baptism. And at that point, the church has recognized that you have its faith, and you've professed that faith publicly, and then you have entered into the church, and then you start working within the church for the ends of increasing your discipleship in the Lord, and serving the Lord in the world.
Would all churches provide this, or is it you have to like find certain churches where they can
Yeah,
baptize you?
all churches, all Christian churches will baptize you.
Okay.
You know, um, and so, but what I would say, to help you identify a Christian church, you need to check if the church can accept the Nicene Creed. Now, it could be that it accepts the Nicene Creed, but it doesn't use the Nicene Creed. That's fine. So long as it can say, yes, we agree with the Nicene Creed, then you have a basic acid test to identify a Christian church from a non-Christian church. If they won't commit to the Nicene Creed, then they could still be a Christian church, but I would have a lot of question marks about why they're hesitant around the Nicene Creed, and for me that's a red flag, and so I would suggest finding a different church. Or it could just
Okay.
be that they're not a Christian church at all. So a very basic acid test to help you navigate and find a Christian church is to check to see whether they can agree with the Nicene Creed.
Yeah.
I can see
100%.
there are questions coming
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
Seems that the church has turned its back on Christians. Would you agree, Bob? No, not at all. The reason why I don't agree is because you're thinking of the church as an institution, and you're thinking of the church as the Church of England, and neither of those two statements equal the church. The church is the people of God. That's people like me. It's people like every Christian in the chat, including the sectarian ones, who are the only ones that seem to be stabbing Christians in the back. But the church is the people, and so the church can't turn its back on itself, though individual Christians can stab other Christians in the back, and we're getting an example of that in the chat right now. But the other thing is that there's more than one institutional church. The Church of England is not the only church in England. The Confessing Church of England is a different church to the Church of England. That hasn't turned its back on Christians. Neither has the Roman Catholic Church, neither has the Orthodox Church, neither have many evangelical churches, neither have many Pentecostal churches, neither have even many Church of England churches. And so the truth of the matter is that the church has not turned its back on Christians, but there are many churches that have failed Christians, like, for instance, the Church of England, the Methodist Church, the United Reformed Church. These churches have lost their way, and we have to make a choice as Christians whether we give up on those institutions or whether we fight to try and make them Christian again. Yep, Galatians 5 verse 4 says, if anyone believes that they are justified by the law, they have fallen from grace. Okay, let's just go back to that because I need to correct her.
What? Which one?
The previous question.
Oh.
The previous statement. So, I mean, this is an example of sectarian ignorance, right? Firstly, Galatians teaches that those that are, those that are trying to save themselves by Jewish law have corrupted the gospel. But what that doesn't understand is that the Galatian church was a primarily Gentile church that was using tokenism or totemism of Judaism, totemism within Judaism, and taking confidence in their salvation. So they thought if they got circumcised and kept the Jewish law, like the food laws, that this meant that they were saved, And there is a danger within churches that, they can believe that, right, because I've been baptized and because I've received the sacrament, that means that I'm saved. And that kind of sacramentalism that doesn't impact, that doesn't flow into a wider Christian walk of faith, this kind of ritualistic sacramentalism, is obviously an equivalent to the Galatians. The Catholic Church does not teach that you are saved by keeping the Ten Commandments. And this is the kind of ignorant statement that sectarians often make. They misrepresent the people that they want to attack. And just like the ethno-nationalists do, they misrepresent things as well. The Catholic Church teaches that you're saved by grace. You're saved by grace through faith alone in Christ alone. And that but they teach that you can lose your salvation, and that's where sectarians often misunderstand their perspective. So just to correct the person, and they don't need to be reconciled because it's a false statement. Way to make friends and influence people, boss. Best of luck with your civic nationalism with extra steps. So there you go again. This is what I mean about bad faith actors. I literally just said in this conversation that I am against civic nationalism, and the bad faith actors are saying, good luck with your civic nationalism. I'm not interested in pandering to anyone. Like, you can either have an honest conversation or you can't. You can either engage with what I'm saying or you don't. I'm putting out my stall. I'm saying I'm a Christian nationalist. I am advocating for Christian nationalism. I want you all to be Christian nationalists. I want you all to become Christians. That's not the same as saying civic nationalism. And the filtering that I think is going on there is because I won't discriminate based upon ethnicity. They're saying that I'm a civic nationalist. And that is not what civic nationalism is about. It misrepresents civic nationalism. It misrepresents me, and it misrepresents Christian nationalism. So I'm sorry, not found, but like, if you can't engage in an honest conversation, then why should I pander to your inability to have an honest conversation about a topic? How can you be sectarian or liberal and Christian? Is this possible? So you can be both and Christian, because being ecumenical, as I am, is not what saves you. Being sectarian is not what saves you. And being liberal is not what saves you. What saves you is that kind of faith that I spoke about, that trust and commitment to the Lord Jesus Christ is the thing that saves you. And so a person can have that, but yet not fully understand how that works out in their life, or misapply it, or fuse it at lower levels with other things, and 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 still be Christian. But at some point, it's going to start damaging or harming their Christian walk. And so sectarians damage and harm their Christian walk because they spend all their time ripping apart the body of Christ, which contradicts the clear teaching of Scripture, fueling division within the church, which contradicts Scripture, failing to love their brothers and sisters, which contradicts Scripture. And liberals fail because they're fusing Christianity with the religion of humanity at lower levels. And so what they start to do is they start to undermine the universality, sanctity, and salvific nature of the church and its role in salvation. And they don't pursue the kingdom of God, they pursue things like human rights. And so they begin to undermine the whole Christian project. And at some point, depending on how aware they are of their sin and how aware they are of how wrong they are, it will increase their accountability. And it may increase their accountability to the point that they stop being a faithful Christian, i.e., they fail to trust in Jesus, or they fail to be committed to Jesus's teachings.
I don't know.
Bob is a good Christian, but his opinions on immigration are very different than other patriots. I think we can agree on that. Well, I mean, I don't know what all the opinions of all the patriots are. Certainly, I don't think that the solution is to become like a North Korean hermit kingdom. I do believe there needs to be a much tighter grip on immigration, and that immigration needs to be filtered so that it favors the needs of the community of the people living here. And I do believe that we need to remove illegal immigrants, and we do need to remove immigrants that maybe have come here legally but are working against the country. But I don't think we need to chuck out every immigrant just because they're an immigrant, you know. And I think that we are going to need immigration. We're going to need immigration for many years to come until we create a family-orientated culture and society. Unless we make a conscious choice that we're all going to live a lot poorer with a lot less of a functioning society, which is possible, but it will be incredibly painful. You know, and if we make that choice as a society, it's a choice that we could make, but I don't think a lot of people fully understand how it will impact us. But I think, again, you can't separate this conversation from the conversation of abortion, contraception, and divorce. And the problem is, I hear a lot of people talking about immigration, but these people, I never see them having, you know, conversations about abortion, contraception, and divorce, and about how we strengthen the family, you know. And I think the patriotic movement has to play the long-term game of creating the kinds of communities that can survive the potential collapse that will come if the progressives continue to drive us over a cliff. In other words, to some degree, we've got to separate ourselves from institutional society and balkanize and Ulsterize, you know, like in Ulster, where you become kind of like a community that looks after itself.
There seems, I don't know if there's a disconnect between what the chat's hearing and what I'm hearing, right? Because what I've heard from yourself is you're not in favor of Indigenous people being a minority. You don't believe that to be a good thing.
Correct.
You do believe in a form of remigration for people that are not contributing, who've come here and are not contributing.
Correct.
But people in the chat are shouting civic nationalists. I don't understand. That's not that.
Well, this is the point. It's bad faith actors.
I'm confused with what people are hearing it, because I've heard the opposite.
Yeah, but it's bad faith actors, and what you've got with these bad faith actors is they're not interested in listening. They're just interested in villainizing anyone. They're essentially like the progressives on the alt left. You know, they villainize anyone that disagrees with them, and they lie about anyone that disagrees with them. In the same way that your alt left communists do. You know, Hope Not Hate, who calls everybody it doesn't like a racist. Well, the ethno-nats are just the same. It's just that their way of calling you a racist is to call you a race traitor. You know, it's the same logic, it's the same attitude. It's just a different terminology. I do want to address, just for the sake of honesty and transparency and clarity, in terms of, I would prefer it if English people became Christian, had children, and therefore maintained their place in our society, right? That's the goal. That's what I want. But I am not willing, I am not committed to the idea of preserving English people just because they're English. If they want to be atheist, continue to have abortions, continue to divorce, continue to use contraception, and continue to destroy themselves, right? So if, because the English continue to not have children and destroy themselves, they become a minority, then they've brought that on themselves. And I'm not, you know, I don't want to preserve that just because they happen to be English.
But you can't leave out the role of the establishment, right? And the programming that has gone into us over all these years.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So the establishment has played its role in, like, if you look at where the worst schools are, right, and they're placed in the worst neighborhoods. It's not by coincidence, is it? It's and I'm not saying like but if you know what I mean. Some of us are designed to be factory workers.
Progressive liberalism is the cancer, and it has been killing Western civilization since the 1960s, right? That's how far you have to go back to look at like the direction that our nation took. But the point is, the antecedents of that move in the 1960s have its origins way back in the 1700s, 1790s, 1780s. The solution is to return to a kind of a muscular Christianity that adopts a form of Christianity that you haven't seen since before the 1700s, but applies itself to the modern world, right? Christianity built England, Christianity built Portugal, Christianity built Spain. It built these nations and many others besides, like Ethiopia, you know. So Christianity is very much about nation building. But the point is, if a nation doesn't want to be built up by Christianity, then it's not my job to just support the idea of keeping it alive for its own sake. Right?
Yeah, but Bob, as I said to you earlier,
my commitment is to the church, the Christian church.
I understand that, Bob, but if
Christian church,
if Britain became 70% Christian Nigerian, 70% Nigerian Christian, Britain is no longer Britain, right?
Is Britain Christian if it's 100% English but Muslim?
You say that again, sorry?
Is England still England if it's 100% English but Muslim?
No, because that's completely different culture, right? You're replacing your own culture with a Arab culture, right?
Right. So clearly,
no, absolutely not.
Yeah. So clearly, the English nation, right? That historical thing that was brought about through the blending of different ethnicities together within a common culture, that English nation that I'm an inheritor of, right, is something that is more than just an ethnicity. Okay, it is also a culture, right? Ethnicity has its part in that picture, but it is more than just an ethnicity. And the thing is, if you want to keep England, you've got to have both. The irony is that if you have the Christian civilization, you will have the ethnicity because of the life-giving energy that Christianity gives to a nation, right? But if I had to choose between living in a white Muslim world or
Yeah.
a black Christian world. As a Christian, I'm going to choose the black Christian world because I'm not going to be persecuted for being a Christian.
I understand your perspective. I see where you're coming from, but yeah, yeah.
I mean, neither of these two options are particularly realistic. And this is another thing that we need to have in this debate is how about rather than using these really extreme hyperbolic examples, how about we start thinking about the more realistic examples,
But
which is,
people do that to you, where they look at you like saying, "Yeah, that's your plan to bring in as many African Christians as possible," right?
well, and they're just bad faith actors. They're just bad faith debaters because I haven't advocated for that.
Okay, right. That should clear that up, really,
Well,
because
it
I've seen
should, but you know it
people
won't.
say that a lot. Yeah.
It should, but you know it won't. Anyway, brother, I've given my 2 hours, and I do have a wife and a family, so I need to get off.
I really do appreciate you coming on, Bob. I was a bit nervous. Apologies. Like, do you know what I mean?
I think
But
you've
yeah,
done
it's,
brilliant. I know you've not done many live streams before, but I think
yeah.
you did this really well. You held the space really well. You allowed people from different perspectives to ask their questions, give out their arguments, you know. And I don't make any apologies for rough handling people that want to be dishonest or bigoted in their perspective. You know, if you think I'm wrong, feel free to book a Zoom call, come and debate me. Let's organize debates. Let's organize
And
conversations.
how do
If
people
you're
do
right,
that, Bob? Where do they go?
I will do. Yeah. If your ideology can't, if you're right, if you can't take criticism, you know, then stop interacting with me in a dishonest way, you know, because you're throwing out ad hominems, you know, putting words into my mouth, things that I haven't said, and then you're being called stupid, and you know, calling out the stupidity of anti-Semitism and you know and these kind of conspiracy theories is a good thing to do because we need to lampoon these narratives and expose them for the ridiculousness that they are so that the rest of us can start thinking about the more intelligent issues and the more intelligent questions. But anybody who wants to get in touch with me, you can go to my website, soldierofchrist.online. You can book in a Zoom call and we can have a conversation one-to-one. Or you can contact me on btbsoko@gmail.com. Right, and you can find all the links on my channel, which is Bob of Speaker's Corner. Right, and I'm happy to talk to anybody. All I would ask is that if you want me to, you know, if you want to have a proper conversation, then engage with what I'm saying, despite the fact, you know, unlike some people today, you know, I've said multiple times I'm against civic nationalism, and there's still people in the chat saying that I'm a civic nationalist, and that's the problem with a lot of the conversation is people don't know how to engage and to listen.
Right. Okay, Bob. I will let you get on with your evening. I really do appreciate you coming on, though. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you very much. God bless you. I've really enjoyed speaking with you, Dave.
Okay.
And,
God bless. Thank you.
And God bless to all the people of goodwill and my brothers and sisters out there. Peace be with you.
All right. Hold on 1 second. All right, guys. Differing opinions, mate. What can I say? So good. So good. Right, folks. Appreciate you all tuning in. Hope you all have a good and enjoyable evening. Take care and God bless.